Would you like to introduce who you are and the history of this room?
My name is Yao Liang. In Chinese is Liang Wei-Yao. And this room, this part of the building was one of the older buildings in Cambridge which is still occupied and used. It was built in 1567 and very little had been modified to it, and in recent years we certainly can't touch the building anymore since it is highly listed. The paneling itself that you can see was introduced in 1692, and again nothing had been done to modify it. It's part of the building of Dr. Keyes himself. When he came back from Italy to Keyes to rescue Keyes and refound the college, and he went into a large-scale building program, and hence the court outside is called Keyes Court. But this building sometimes referred to the Court of Wisdom.
So I can see some photos of your family. So I want to begin the interview from your family history.
We regard ourselves as a settler, a Chinese settler in Indonesia, and of course there are two sides of the ancestor, the father side and the mother side. And of the two, I'm the fourth generation from the father side and the third generation from the mother side. That means my great-grandfather and grandfather from both sides settled in Indonesia or came out from China at the end of the 19th century towards also the beginning of 20th century. That was a very turbulent time in China, and it's at the end of Qing dynasty with a great deal of foreign interventions, Boxer uprising, and so on. And life must have been very difficult in those days, and that's why they came out.
So what did your grandparents, the first generation, do? Do you know that?
When they first settled down in Southeast Asia, they really only had the shirts on their back, nothing else, so they had to find ways of surviving very quickly. My great-grandfather, my father's side of great-grandfather in Singapore, just quickly got hold of a barber kit and set up street side hair cutting, and make a living that way. His son, that's my grandfather, then established himself as a cobbler, making shoes by hand, and that was a great improvement, of course, from hair cutting in the street. But he then got into, or at least his business became very difficult during the depression of 1920s, when machinery replaced human in making things like shoes. And on top of that, he has a very large family, which was making his life really very hard indeed. My father's family's life very hard. My other grandfather from my mother's side was luckier. He started the business selling on other people's behalf jewelries, and eventually became a goldsmith and metal worker, but his wealth was completely stripped of him when in 1927 he was ransomed. He was kidnapped and ransomed by bandits, I suppose, in China. From then on, there was nothing left.
So, where was their hometown in China? Is from coastal area?
Yes, most of the what you call migrants of Chinese migrants in Southeast Asia came from coastal cities or villages, and my grandparents and great-grandparents came from Meixian, which is situated on the north side of Guangdong province, bordering with Jiangxi and Fujian. And that's actually, that corner has a large concentrations of the so-called Hakka people. That's my people. It's very common in Hak simply means guest or moving, people who are moving and guests in different places. And the Hakka people started off in Henan and a little bit of Shanxi, but mainly Henan, and drifting south begin with was in the Song period because of the, again, trouble from the Jing people from the north, and they just emigrated south, and of course the Song very quickly became first of all the North Song, and then become the Southern Song period. That was in 11th century or so, and I think later on you find Hakka people all over the place, not only Guangdong, Fujian, Sichuan, Guangxi, and the more famous one in China, I suppose, is Ye Jianying. Ye Jianying, as it happened, came from exactly the same village, only a few streets away from my village. I went to visit my village. That was quite interesting. Later on we'll talk about that, but I visited China in 1983, but in 1986 I took the whole family to the ancestral home in Meixian, and we had tarmac road. The road was tarmac only to as far as Ye Jianying's house. Beyond that was earth.
So your family spoke Kejiahua when they were in Indonesia.
Yes, in the family, in the house, I would speak the mother tongue of Kejiahua, and I'm still completely conversant in that. And in fact, it's the most comfortable dialect for me to speak. But since my parents passed away, and becoming rarer and rarer for me to have the opportunity to speak it.
So where did you learn the Chinese Mandarin?
My schooling was entirely Chinese, from kindergarten all the way until the time I came to England. I mentioned just now about my grandparents, but my parents, of course, I never met my grandparents. They either passed away long before I was born, or when I was very young. I didn't have the opportunity to meet them. But my parents were both people who have great respect for knowledge, and because they themselves went through at the time for Chinese people realizing that education was the most important thing. My mother was one of the pioneering women to receive educations before the First World War fully, and my father also, both received Chinese educations, and they were they then became teacher separately. My father came from Singapore at the age of 17, again for simply to find a living and support his family. He was number 2 in his family, and he had 11 siblings, quite a large family to support. So he went to Indonesia from Singapore, became a teacher of English, based on simply gaining qualification from correspondence course of Xiamen Daxue, and then in of course then my father and mother met in school, and 3 or 4 years later they got married. My mother, as I already said, not only received quite high education by the standard of their time, and she made good use of her knowledge and became a teacher. And not only that, what was surprising to me now, looking back, is that she was allowed to work away from her home, living away, living in school, in fact. And again, before marriage, this must have been quite unusual. But it just showed the kind of liberal mindedness of their parents, and of course of themselves, making use of the opportunity. And they passed that spirit on to us children, and we greatly benefited from that freedom and liberal thinking, equality in sexes between sons and daughter, equality in opportunity, development, and career choice, freedom of career choice, and so on. They never impose their will on us, and that's really was marvelous. But the greatest gift of all is, I suppose, is their not just this liberal mindedness, but also their respect for knowledge, and whether it is of words or of technical skills and hard work. And they also believe in hard work can overcome just about everything. Whether it's true or not, if you're lucky, that's fine.
So also, do you know why the Chinese people very much respect knowledge and education?
Well, I think that's very much ingrained in the Chinese blood of thinking that education is of the highest order, and going down to commerce and skilled worker. But of course, these days, skill and practical ability is just as important. But that's very much Chinese. But some people keep it on, and some don't. And our family tend to be, even though my father later on went into, or rather left teaching, left teaching, and he went on to keep all his teachers' friends, and we frequently were visited by past teachers from various schools to our house, and that's the atmosphere I grew up in.
In other time in Indonesia, do you think education will help people to jump to a higher class? Is the way that to?
It's, I think, not consciously. Education was a way of improving the quality of life, and improving, you see, how to look after your health requires a bit of education, and how to bring up your children in those days requires education. I think the health aspect was really very important because of infant mortality, and it was very obvious that with education, infant mortality goes down in general, and the tropic in Southeast Asia, the tropic was really full of diseases if you're not careful, and people don't survive. But a certain discipline of hygiene and so on was important under very, very severe conditions during the war and immediately after the Second World War. No, it wasn't simply trying to get anywhere at all, but trying to improve one's quality. Chinese people in that part of the world were not interested in local politics. weren't interested in getting anywhere in that form as perhaps today people perceive. They just solely interested in money making, and once they made the money, they would send the money back to the village to build school, build bridges, build roads, and so on, and build, of course, first thing is to build the family house. That's very much a kind of traditions, although my parents weren't in that league, because my father had to do everything to support his family in Singapore, and supporting all his younger brother and sister to receive higher education, although my father himself did not have the opportunity for university education, but his younger brother and sisters had a taste of it, but were all interrupted by the Second World War, so then none of them actually finished the schooling. But there was the opportunity there. Again, the background is that they came from poverty, and they simply take the first opportunity to get themselves out of poverty, and that's how it is. And life was relatively easy in those days in Indonesia.
Yeah, I look at a brief history about Indonesia at the time, and it is the colonial area of Netherlands, and Dutch people do this business there. Do you have any? Did your parents tell you anything about the business, because your father worked for a Dutch company?
I think I was a little too young to have to form any kind of real impression of what the Dutch do in Jakarta. Indonesia became independent in 1945, but really only gained power in 1949, in December 49, a couple of months after China, the foundation of People Republic of China. As far as my father was concerned, he joined. Having got married, he found he needed a bit more money to support the family, because my mother came off schooling, teaching in school. So my father got a job working for a Dutch-American oil company called MKPM, which I think is the forerunner of Mobil. And there he very quickly learned to speak Dutch quite proficiently, I believe, and also at the same time got himself qualified as an accountant, again through the correspondence course of Xiamen Daxue, and he then became, with that qualification, became the chief cashier of the oil company, which was, I think, quite takes up some doing. That was an interesting, but also a bit of a shameful history of the Dutch master. They had, when the Japanese came down south very rapidly following Pearl Harbor, literally in a few weeks, they were at the end of 1942. They were already the bombing already started in Indonesia, and they were marching in. The Dutch and the American had fled, but they asked people like my father, the staff, to destroy or at least damage the refinery. But my father never handled explosives, absolutely didn't know how to do it, and besides, the Japanese were already just at the other end of the town, so they quickly did a few explosions. Didn't cause very much damage at all. I think the Japanese got the refinery working again in a matter of days, but of course that that means my father would have been, if caught, would have been not just in prison, probably lost his life over this matter. So the end of 1942, I then fled to Java. In fact, we got separated. I got separated from my parents. They had to go first with my brother and sister, and I was entrusted to a good friend of my father, and we literally had to run for our life. But it's a friend, so we got reunited again very quickly in Java, and it took about 6 months before we finally settled in Jakarta, and that was fine. We were literally anonymous. Jakarta is a very big city, unless someone reported who my father had done, but nobody did, and we safely passed through the wartime.
So your father continued to work for their company, or
no? After the war, things have changed, and I think my mother did not like too much of the lifestyle in the refinery in Palembang, where the refinery is. It was very much she didn't feel comfortable working for Western masters for some reason, because she wasn't as good as my father in terms of picking up the language and getting on with people. So we felt that they want to take the chance in Jakarta and make a living, and that's when he started business, but none of them successful. I can remember no business lasted. This is just family business, and none of them lasted longer than a year, so they always lost money.
So, well, how can they support your studies in the UK later if they always lost the money?
That's another story, of course. By then, my parents have to move to Singapore. In fact, they moved to Singapore 6 months before I graduated from my high school.
Okay.
And I had to make a decision whether to go to China or go somewhere else for further studies. Very much like to continue my study in some form. That was the trend of the time, and going to China had the attractions of being free, and also with this romantic idea of building the new People Republic and contributing to that effort. However, my brother and sisters, having already gone there, and being the youngest one, I felt it wasn't quite right to just leave my parents behind, because going to China was a one-way ticket. Once you're there, you cannot get out again. At least that was the idea at the time. You swore allegiance to China, you abandoned the citizenship of Indonesia, and so on. There was no way back. There's no return ticket, so to speak. I also had begin to have suspicions about what is going on in the politics of China. That was in 57 and 58, at the time of 100 Flowers Bloom, following the Sanfan, Wufan, and so on. I felt things weren't going quite as rosy as the propaganda machine were telling us. So I would like to go somewhere else, although I did not prepare myself for that, but it was within a few months that that decision became hardened. But my parents encouraged me to go to England, and I had one contact in London, But my parents said, you just go and we will worry about how to support you. But at that time I knew they had no money to support me. And it's all luck and opportunity, and it's simply, this was, as I say, 1958, late 1958, and Singapore was still a colony of Britain, but with a deadline of withdrawing in about 2 or 3 years' time, and of course the army needed accommodation for their army staff, and one of the lucrative things to do is to buy a house and rent it to the British government, the local government, British government, and having paid they bought 2 houses. They never owned a house before. It's all new venture for them, and this is at the suggestions of some friends. They bought 2 houses, and having paid the mortgage, there was from the rent, there was enough left to support me in England. But I also lived a very frugal life, and I was in Portsmouth doing my GCE A-levels. There I remember vividly, I stayed in YMCA with the rent of £3, 12 shillings, 6pence a week, full board and accommodations.
So before you come to the UK, your sister and brother have already in mainland China, and you are in the high school. And did they tell you something about the mainland China? Anything?
Yes, they did. There was the early 1950s. Life was hard in China, but the purpose was clear, and my impression is everybody was relatively happy with the situations, including people like my brothers and sisters who were students, and their politics had not gone that far to control educations and control where people should go, what people should study. So by and large, my brother and sister got to the university they wanted and studied the subject they wanted. And one sister went to Peking University, another sister went to the Peking Normal University, and the brother also at Peking, and after the adjustment 验系调整 of university, and there was a Beijing 社语学院 which was originally part of Peking University also, Peking or Tsinghua, I'm not quite sure, but the early promise to the students that was the good thing, in fact, turned out to be quite true, but things start to very rapidly go downward very rapidly. And by the time when I was ready to join this movement, I hesitated. Yes, correspondence, no problem. But although they were happy in China and content, I should say, rather than happy, I don't remember them ever putting pressure on me to go and join them. Maybe my memory is seem to question, but I don't remember them ever doing it.
So the Chinese government support their living expense and everything.
Yes, those were the days when school students were paid to go to university, in a way similar to what the grant system here in the old days, the local grant system, local authority grant system in England, and there too, my sister had something like $18 a month, and the food and so on ration. but $18 was a lot of money.
Yeah, $18.
Be- Especially when there weren't very much goods in the shop to buy to spend your money on. So that was a very good time for them, but it very rapidly this disappeared. The system gone.
So they stay in China till 1970s, or
they stay in China, lived through the cultural revolutions until 1976, but all three of them and their family came out to Hong Kong.
In the end of 1970s.
By around 1976, yes, middle of.
So how were their lives in the Cultural Revolution, because they have families in Indonesia?
In many ways, the overseas Chinese or Huaqiao was lucky in China because they never got into any kind of high position. Some of them joined the party, but only low ranking. They never held responsible positions. So they did not become, most of them, not just my brother and sisters, they didn't become the target of Red Guards. So they didn't suffer very much. They joined the movement, like going to the countryside for work for a month, 2 months, and learning from the peasant or relearning from the peasants how to live. But my brother, because his profession was in oil explorations, and he was differently treated. He went to Daqing. He was the early band of people. When Daqing was just a complete field of long grass, and my brother was one of the first people, among the first people in the explorations of oil of Daqing Yutian for I think 3 or 4 or 5 years, and before he was sent to Jianghan in Hubei, became Jianghan Seiyuxuan, I think, to teach there, and taking students around to explore. But his life was protected because of his job, or because of the people who work in that kind of work, job like oil, and I suppose that nobody can afford to lose them.
And how were your sisters? What did they?
Well, my sister was just the one in Peking Normal College, Beijing Shifan Daxue, remained to be the lecturer there, and she, as I say, like many people in those days, just did what they were told. Went to the countryside to go through the process of learning with the farmers. My other sister was more defined after finishing in the research in Peking University, not only undergraduate, but he also did research in Peking University in botany, and was assigned a job. As you will know, in China everything is assigned. You don't have the freedom to choose. She was assigned a job to teach in Shenyang Daxue, but she refused to go because her husband, my brother-in-law, was assigned to Dalian Gongxueyuan, and so she just said I wasn't going, and went to join her husband, and had no job for the rest of her life, no proper job. But for some reason, the system actually continued to pay her salary as though she was working in Shenyang Daxue. But I think to partly solve her conscience, she became the librarian of Daniel Gongxie, free of charge for her, but she was already paid anyway.
Okay. Oh.
And she did not suffer much. I don't know. I don't think she did anything to anybody done anything to them during the Cultural Revolutions.
Did they tell you something about the other people's life? Or
No.
they're not allowed to write something in the letter?
It probably they may be wary of writing anything in letters in case it is read and intercepted. That I think is the wise move. But I also detected from my other Chinese friends from mainland China that they don't like talking about the experience of Cultural Revolutions. It's very difficult to get much out from them talking about Cultural Revolution experience, except perhaps my very good friend Chao Tianqing, who was a fellow, the first Chinese fellow in Keys, and who was a friend and in fact assistant of Joseph Needham. He was the head of or director of the biochemistry China Sinica 中国科学院 in Shanghai, and he was more prepared to talk about his experience in a very light sort of way, although I knew he suffered from a different source a lot, but he just spoke lightly about it, and I think it must have been very hard for them to recall this memory. People who have suffered, they rather forget it. The fact that they have survived, it's sort of, to them, it is good enough, and they don't want to remember anything of that experience. And similarly, his wife, Xie Sida, was like that too. She didn't want to talk too much. And in her case particularly, she was very wary of speaking out because of her position in Shanghai. She held relatively important position in the. She was Zhenxie Zuxi, as well as later on became Vice Chancellor of Fudan Daxue.
So even in 1980s, so even they don't need to worry about talking about anything. They just don't want to record.
They did not want to leave any record. I think more because of the memory is painful. It is so painful that they rather not talk about it. Not because they don't. Not because of any other factor. I mean, the other factors may be there of worrying about it may come back. The same thing may repeat itself. But I don't think that's the important one. At their age, they're not too concerned about that. It's just hard for them to recall. Life is always a matter of luck and meeting the right people at the right time. When I was very small, my parents were financially rather in a hard, going through a hard time, as well as they were of the type, I think, to allow children to grow up as children. But in my case, probably a little too much. So I was I was playing a little too much, and I particularly like making toys. I've always liked making things, and at that age was making toys, making yo-yos, making kites and to fly. Because we have no money, I have to make my own. But I remember the result is that I spent after school all afternoon in the streets playing until probably just before dinner time, and clearly I had no time for homework and no hope of passing exam. in school. So I keep failing and having to move from one school to another school simply to try to avoid remaining in the same year. But at about the age of 11, I met a very disciplinarian maths teacher who showed me really the beauty of mathematics, and all of a sudden that beauty and the logic of mathematics was in front of me, and I just fell in love with that kind of study, and science became the main interest because of the one of the most interesting thing about science is the consistency and the very verifiable fact. And if it is true, then it's verifiable. Otherwise, if it's not verifiable, it's not true. And so that also kind of trained me into a kind of start of an experimentalist, quite apart from the fact that I liked making things. And there was a mathematics teacher who later on in high school, that was in primary school, but later on in high school, he became my chemistry teacher as well. And again, in high school, there were many science teachers, many physics. Wei-Yao Liang was physics teacher, and mathematics was Wen Hongling, and this chemistry teacher was Li Xixun, and so on. They were very important. They play an important factor or role in my life. They were very good teacher. They were not only good instructor, but they're also highly inspirational. And these are the people who, if it wasn't for the war, would really have been university teachers. They're highly qualified, but because of the war and the chaos immediately following, they remained teaching in high school, and I was a beneficiary of that. But of course, it's unlucky to them. But it gave me a very good grounding, very important. And ever since that 11-year-old encounter with the math teacher, I suddenly sort of lost my innocent childhood, so to speak, and became a rather serious student. And that seemed to have continued.
So did Mr. Li treat you specially, or they treat everyone the same?
No, everyone was the same, and I would not know if he treated me specially, but I don't think he did. And favoritism was something you carefully avoid in school, otherwise you could get into all kinds of accusation. Yeah.
Mm. So did he know your family, know your parents, or you just no?
I don't know how soon he discovered that we have some family connection, but but I don't think he did it at that time. It turns out that his father or maybe his grandfather was a worker, a staff in my grandfather's goldsmith shop. We are both his family. He's Mr. Li, and my mother's family was also Li, and they all came from the same village. In fact, Meixian Shongkou, and the but only way later, I didn't even know that he was Kejiaren, because he never spoke Kejiahua to me, and I wasn't inquiring.
Okay, and you mentioned that the Bazhong is a kind of a left-wing school. So how was like?
Well, Bazhong was the immediately post-war, particularly after the founding of the People's Republic of China, and the the Chinese community in Indonesia was divided and between left and right, and this ran straight through in the education, in schools, as well as in the business organizations like Wei-Yao Sanghui, Wei-Yao Zhonghui, and so on, as well as many organizations of people who come from the same village. Most of them basically is Tongxianghui, come from the same village, and they were either leaning to the left or leaning to the right. There's no middle road for them. And my school was very much on the left side, and controlled by the Chinese embassy in terms of staffing and so on. But they couldn't control in the way that they control school in China. In any case, to begin with, the Chinese school in China were not so under control. In any case, because it's Indonesia, they can only try and influence it, and they put several underground communist members, party members in the school. We did not know it at the time, and subsequently this became known to us. So the political flavor was very strong. But people like me, although attracted all kinds of unwelcome label, but nevertheless was allowed to continue my interest in science. And by that time, I spent even more time making toys, but now the toys are upgraded. Things like making electric motors, electroplating, doorbells, and my bedroom was full of wires connecting everywhere. When I wake up, I always want to switch on the first thing, and then the train will run around on my. I built a deck above my head, and there is a doorbell and so on. It was that kind of interest in my case.
So did your parents support this, or they said, "Oh, the boy is very..."
I'm sure they tacitly supported what I did, but in any case, there clearly was no harm, and it didn't cost money. That's very important, because to make a motor, you have to wind the armature and everything. You have to start from just a piece of wire and a few metal plates and make things work. But you learn a great deal by doing it yourself.
So how about the right-wing school? Did you know anything about?
The right-wing schools, I know very little. By the way, I should also include this division between left and right. The most important one is in the media, the newspaper. There's a leftist newspaper, the rightist newspaper. No, I have very few friends in the other camp, so to speak, because it would be considered, it's just unthinkable to have friends on the other side. And when they graduate, even though when we were children we may be playing with one another, but as soon as you enter secondary school, you become a more mature student, of course, relatively speaking. The friendship seems to just get either diluted or disappear. And when they're finished, they would go to Taiwan, and 50% or so of the graduates from my school would go to China, mainland China. And I was a very, very black sheep to come to England, the only one.
So the right-wing school is controlled by Taiwan or
yes, yes.
America?
Well, I should say I know relatively little. I do know they play the same game. There is propaganda machine at work at the worst aspect. In other words, there were probably 90% lies and little truth in whatever they say, especially when they say something about the other side. In those days, the topic was 土地改革 at the beginning, and then 三反五反 and so on. And in Taiwan was 反攻大陆 and so on. The people on the other side had much more money, and probably by nature they're more this their background, but also I do know some of them were directly supported by CIA. It's the same game. I was very lucky in my secondary school or high school to be taught by some very, very good teachers, particularly those in physics and mathematics. These are the group of people who got away from China during Japanese invasion, and they had been highly trained. One I remember from the Jiao Tong University in Shanghai, another one from the normal college in Nanjing. Those are very reputable places, and we people like me benefited from their excellent qualification as well as dedication. They were very good instructor and highly inspirational. To us, these people have seen, of course, much bigger world, whereas we were just local, and their story of the bigger world was always inspiring, as well as inspiring in the subject, simply because they have seen so much. In peacetime, these people would easily be university teachers to any standard, but we're just lucky to have them.
Would you like to introduce the life of immigrants Chinese community in Indonesia in the early time, and how they relevant to the homeland, and what's the difference between the most recent immigrants and earlier generation, particularly for those immigrants to Indonesia in 16th century, 15th century, yeah.
For some reason, the overseas Chinese, the settlers that is, tend to divide themselves in depending on where they come from which village, and so on, and certainly province. And in that way they form their own little associations and helping the later comers financially or otherwise, and their children as well for education. So it's a way of looking after one another, and this is part of the feature of overseas Chinese in Southeast Asia, all over the world, I believe. Even in London, they have that kind of organizations. But on the whole, there are two groups of Chinese. The one to which I belong is the more recent settlers. My ancestor came in late 19th century, early 20th century, which I already spoken about. But mainly, because we are so recent, we still carry with us the very kind of Chineseness that has not diminished. We receive Chinese education, such as I did, and our customs and our thinking, that's what I would call our mindset, is very Chinese, and we in the community, the only thing they're concerned about is the welfare of China, and its suffering due to foreign invasion and economic plight and so on, and it's that sort of mindset. However, there is another very large group of Chinese who went to Indonesia in 16th, 17th century. They have, at the time, of course, because of the circumstance, they have dispersed themselves into largely in the villages in the countryside, in the rural area, and through intermarriages of many generations, they have become almost like Indonesian because they have adopted the culture and the customs of Indonesian, partly in order to survive. They have to, and they hardly speak Chinese. Nevertheless, sometimes one is surprised to find some of them still claiming to be Chinese because they still observe Chinese customs such as Lunar Festival and the Moon Festival as well as Duanwu. That is a bit of a surprise, but they're very proud of having a bit of Chinese blood in them. And these people in 16th, 17th century mainly come from Fujian. These people also made very important contribution during the colonial time. Some of those who are probably what I would call wealthier ones, their children received Dutch education and they even went to Holland for higher education. They came back, depending on their level of education and qualification, they became civil servants, lawyers, as well as doctors, and serving, in fact, the entire community. And they play an important role. The pity is that this group of Chinese never mix with the earlier, what I mentioned earlier, of the later arrivals, because, as I said, the mindset is very different, and the language is quite a barrier. The more recent one tend not to be able to speak Indonesian at all, whereas the earlier settler speak only Indonesian, plus if they had Dutch education, Dutch. That is important. But going back a little bit on the more recent settler of Chinese in Indonesia, such as the people I mingle with, as I already said, they have a very strong sense of loyalty to China. They contributed in a very significant way during Sino-Japanese War in terms of materials, especially money. They send money, as everything to China and to help the war effort. But this strong sense of belonging to China it led to a very serious problem of splitting when Communist China was founded in 1949, and then some of them immediately were in favor of course, Communist China, and there are still the other half who were in favor of Taiwan government or Kuomintang government. This left-right split was quite serious, and looking back is quite interesting because not only newspaper, school are split. You got left-ish school, right-ish school, newspaper the same, and people who used to be friends become enemy, and because they just can't stand each other on this sort of thing. There was excessive propaganda from both sides, and on the side of the communist Chinese leaning part, this sentiment was very ruthlessly, as well as I think I could say ruthlessly exploited by the Chinese government at the time of their foreign policy. The Chinese embassy and consulates in Jakarta play a very important role in the life of overseas Chinese. They control my school, they control a lot of things, sometimes subtle, sometimes less subtle. And this further, they basically encourage Chinese settler to be Chinese. They treat them as though they are part of Chinese nationals living in Indonesia. The fact is, these people are really Indonesian of Chinese origin, and the embassy or Chinese government knowingly played down that that fact. And that's why when I say ruthless, is because when trouble occur, such as some Chinese inevitably became very wealthy, since they are only interested in making money, their lifestyle excessively flamboyant and inviting great deal of jealousy. And that may have been an excuse, but it is true feeling from the Indonesian, and there were racial conflicts one after another. But because because the Chinese, those Chinese were encouraged not to think of themselves as Indonesian. But when the trouble comes, the embassy just pack up and go. I mentioned about the policy of the foreign policy of Chinese government in the 50s and 60s, which I consider was a mistake. But by the 90s, China has changed. It's a different government and different thinking, and I got the feeling that they really have also realized their mistakes, and in a lot of ways they are quite right not to protest about the treatment of Chinese, really Indonesian of Chinese origin in Indonesia, because they are Indonesian, they are not Chinese. But there is a kind of a way of a kind of degrees with how much you protest or just keep silent, and I think some of the criticism of the Chinese government in 1998 was that they kept silent all the way, and there were cases, clear cases of human rights and brutality, which they could easily make some statement also. But I doubt very much it would have very great effect on what happened. One of the, again, a characteristic of Indonesian, ethnic Indonesian, is that they tend to get let off their steam, their feeling in a sometimes very violent way, but it never lasts very long. A few days later or a few weeks later, it's all subsided, and everything is back to normal, which is a good thing.
So did you go back to Indonesia recently, often, or?
Well, my most recent visit must have been 2005, and also 3 or 4 years before that a few times. But there was a big gap. I left Indonesia in 1958, then one visit in 71. After that, I for more than 20 years I did not go until the turn of this century.
So what kind of impression you have of the local Chinese, Indonesian Chinese? Are you?
Depends what you are meaning, and it is the Chinese community is moving in a direction really to be expected, because 1966, when Suharto took power, there was suppressions of very strong suppressions of anything Chinese. Non-Chinese newspaper, Chinese school were closed down, and people couldn't even speak Chinese in the street, in public. All those are punishable offense, and so in order to survive, many Chinese had to very quickly learn how to live in a country which they had not experienced before. They have to learn Indonesian, speak Indonesian. Some of them adopt Indonesian name or forced to adopt Indonesian names, and so on and so forth. So it is a strange feeling. By the time I went back in the late 1990s and 2000, early 2000s, many of my nephews couldn't speak any Chinese. Of course, most of them couldn't. A few learned Chinese at home, but most of them couldn't speak Chinese. They are still Chinese, but when I say they are still Chinese, they look Chinese, but they speak only Indonesian, and my Indonesian was very limited. So there was an interesting change in the relationship between myself and these people. the interesting thing is, of course, when I left Indonesia in Jakarta, was Chinese was proud to be Chinese, and I think a mistake, as I already said, proud to be. They think of themselves as Chinese nationals, but by 1990s, they realized they are not Chinese. They happen to be Chinese descendant, but they are Indonesian. That's a very big change, and it's a very important change. And it is that kind of change which will, I think, contribute to the improvement of relationship between Chinese and Indonesians. I keep saying Chinese, I mean Chinese descendant in Indonesia.
So do they have any kind of the similar emotion that you have with Chinese, with the country, with China? Or they
probably not. Of course I can't speak for them, but the reason I have a strong attachment to China is because that was my education. When I left Indonesia, I was of that mindset again. I use the same word, although at the time it was simply doubt, but later the doubt became even deeper and so on, of Chinese politics. But that's a separate matter from one's attachment to the heritage of China and culture of China. My nephew, they marry Chinese, most of them, but some of them will marry the first generation of Chinese Indonesian, the children of Chinese Indonesian mixed marriage. The important thing about the behavior of the new generation of Chinese is that they're very practical, and marriage is probably rather like mainland China. It's a step on a practical direction rather than anything else. So, of course, the opportunity to meet and make friends with a wider community, including Indonesians or mixed Indonesian Chinese, that opportunity increased enormously in the late 90s. There are now schools which there are almost no segregated schools, segregated in terms of race. I don't think there is one. Quite unlike in my time, Chinese school means Chinese school. My school had more than 3,000 students. There was only one Indonesian student. One Indonesian student who then went to Beijing, became a diplomat.
So what kind of people you meet? So they are, besides students, are there any businessmen or?
Oh, I'm sure there are businessmen, but I cannot possibly make any kind of contact with them. Simply, I was doing all the wrong thing. Dinner one should. This is back in 1950s. Of course, people dressed for dinner. I was, because of the heat, and I was still going to dinner with my wearing my shorts and sweatshirts and so on. It was learning right from day one what to wear, what to say. Like, you don't say good night when you first meet people before dinner, and so on. You do need. It was quite comical in part, and if one isn't careful with the wrong kind of attitude, you might say it's also rather sad and humiliating, because you always show you are ignorant. It's true, I was ignorant of practice, culture of other people, but if you take the attitudes that you're learning, it doesn't matter to show a little bit of ignorance. In fact, no problem at all, since it is true after all. Then your feeling is not hurt. I do see some people, my own contemporaries and so on, very feel offended by how other people treat them, and sometimes due to, quite a lot of the time, due to their own sensitivity in in this matter. So your own attitude really is the most important. That determines how what you're going to do with this thing. And if you have the right attitude, you never get hurt.
So, are there any first-class rooms?
It's a proper ship of 23,000 tons. Ships were quite big in those days.
Big of the ship, okay, it's a big one.
And but nowadays I think they're smaller. It was very slow. The fastest speed was 22 knots. I remember all this thing very well because there was always a notice on the boat telling you how fast in every morning and where we are going and so on. And so again, another learning process about boats. What was a little sad about that ship was that it actually had taken part in First World War as for war effort transporting people during the First World War. This is so. Our voyage, our journey was the last journey for that ship. So after we were dropped at Tilbury, London, then the ship went straight to the scrapyard. It was very sad.
It was a very dangerous trip. You're very lucky.
I never felt any danger. It was so big for me.
Okay, it's a British ship.
Oh yes, it's
a British
P&O.
P&O. I would like to know your personal experience in London, first year, as a fresh Londoner. How was that?
Well, that was certainly very exciting for me. Completely new place. Everything was new. Everything was interesting and worth finding out a little bit more. When I first came to England, my only connection was a much older schoolmate who was studying at Battersea College, and she not only picked me up at the dock because we came by boat in those days, not flying, and then settled me for a few days, and then introduced me to other Chinese students, and who it so happened that one of them was brilliant, and he, for reason I cannot fathom out, he volunteered to take me to his school or his college, that's Portsmouth College, and help me to enroll in there. One thing I did not want when I first came to London was to plunge myself among Chinese students, and because I thought I want to, since I'm here, I better learn more about the English and whatever they have to offer. And I have seen within a few days that the Chinese community, the Chinese students community in London are just A, they don't seem to be serious students, and B, they hardly learn anything from their experience, even after many years in London. So I wanted to get away from that, and I was very lucky to have met up with this Shen, he's called Shen Lijiu, and he happened to be the descendant of Ling Zexu's son-in-law, Shen. Do you know?
No.
Ling Zexu has two daughters, and one married a Liu, another one married a Shen, and this Shen became again Liang Guang, the Zongdu, became the governor of Canton and Fujian, and doing much the same work as his father-in-law, defending the China Sea in those days, and controlling what can be imported and or not. Of course, by this time it's post the Opium War already. So I went to Portsmouth, and the first, having having studied for 3 months, and the first opportunity I had was Christmas to come to London, mainly for a bit of Chinese food. But it was very exciting time, and the Chinese students in London were very politicized. I think that is common feature about young Chinese everywhere. I'm not sure about in China, but certainly overseas. They're very, very politicized. You either belong to the left or belong to the right. But I was too busy to be involved in these kind of activities, because I know I have a big task to do. I had to concentrate my mind and energy on studying. And again, a lot of these Chinese activities and sentiment was encouraged by Chinese embassy. There was organized dinner, of course, Chinese New Year, National Day, and so on. And I don't mind going there for the food, because the food was good, and good Chinese food was very hard to come by in London in those days. The only Chinese restaurant that I know of, and of any quality, was a long way away at the East End, in the docks area, called Old Friends. If you speak to anyone of my generation Chinese, they will tell you they know about Old Friends. Everybody knows.
So what kind of restaurant it is?
Actually, Chinese called 老油记.
老油记. Is Cantonese people manage that, or?
No. Well, we weren't fussy. It was well done. So I don't think it's any description. But perhaps to go back, visit them again, if it still exists, we wouldn't be happy. But in those days, that was very good. And I do remember the proprietor was someone who probably opium smoking. He was very thin. He always had smoke and on cigarette in his mouth, and with black teeth and so on. But the food was all right.
Okay. I mean the style of the food.
No, I cannot tell.
You cannot
anymore.
tell.
Yeah,
Okay.
They were tasty. But they're certainly not of a kind of description one might give it today, like Sichuan or anything else. It's Hunan Cai, Sichuan Cai, and so on. It's not like that. There's no character in that sense, except that it's good enough for us.
Okay.
And not expensive.
So, what the family background of Chinese students at the time?
When you say Chinese student, they are not from China.
They're not from mainland of China.
No. There were hardly any. They were from Hong Kong and Singapore, Malaysia. Those are the main the places that supply Chinese students. And those from Hong Kong, again, are divided between the two groups. One group is the Cantonese speaking and Chinese in Hong Kong who've been there for many generations, and who can't speak Mandarin. And the other group were the children of recent refugee, if you want to call it that, but emigrant then, from Shanghai after 1949 or 1948-49. Remember, I'm talking about late 50s, so it's still within that generations. And there are a lot of Shanghainese as a reason of that, and they certainly spoke Mandarin, and they are the people who, from my impression, they're very clever. They did very well in the university, in the exam, and it's always somebody that whenever we talk about people, that group of people, you can't help saying they are very clever and high achiever.
So you haven't met anyone from mainland of China at the time?
Not at that time, but in the 60s, and then we do, but very few.
In the 60s, that means when you were in the college.
Yes,
you
when
graduated.
I was in Cambridge.
Have you been to Chinatown in London at the time in 1950s?
There was no Chinatown. There was no
It's
Chinese
no Chinatown.
restaurant.
Oh,
except
really?
one, the one I just mentioned, the Old Friend in East End.
So the current Chinatown was newly developed.
Yes, it's new probably very rapidly. I was in London for 3 years. By the end of that 3 years, towards the third year, there were a few Chinese restaurants in Shaftesbury Avenue and 2 or 3 maybe, and one even not very far from where I was staying. But there was no a kind of, now you can identify Chinatown by just walking into this on the street, the Wardour Street I think is the other one. But in those days there are Chinese restaurants if they are introduced, and you couldn't say there's a community as such, but that only came later, very quickly though. I think when it came there was a large factor of Vietnamese Chinese in them, rather than Chinese from the mainland, because that was during the 60s was the Vietnam War, and the Chinese escaped or refugee from there to all over the world, and they probably, I wouldn't say from the foundation of Chinese in London Chinatown, but they certainly make a big contribution.
How did you get the offer from Imperial College? Did you get A in the?
Well, I suppose that's, it goes without saying that I did have a good A-level and S-level results in order to be accepted by Imperial College, and it wasn't straightforward to begin with, because I kept saying I did not speak very much English, and even worse when it's one-to-one interview at every college I applied, I was turned down, but for some reason I was mad enough not to let that affect my my mood or my effort in doing the exam. I somehow it didn't bother me, and in the end I did have good enough results, and Imperial College was the first to offer me, and I took it on. I think that was not a bad decision.
So you mentioned that your father self-teach the Dutch and English. So you did the same thing.
I did the same thing, but I didn't do it well, not as well as he did in his language enterprise. No, I was simply did the minimum I need to do to get by, using the old Chinese textbooks and writing English in between the lines to learn the language. That is no way to learn language. So all my English was very scientific English for many years. I was able to do that. Again, I had to give credit to my school, because when I came here, I was probably a year ahead of the A level. In other words, during the first year of advanced level study, I have already covered most of the stuff back in Indonesia. So I wasn't using the lecture or the textbook to learn the stuff. I was really using the lecture and textbook to learn English. But because I already know what the books say, it's just understanding it from using different language.
So you live in a student hostel, right? When you were in the Portsmouth College, how many students share?
No, I live in YMCA. That's the Young Men's Christian Association. In the old part of Portsmouth, partly because it was cheap. I had to pay £3, 12 shillings, 6 pence for 1 week of board and lodging, and that was marvelous, because I wasn't well off, my parents weren't well off, but they were able to support me, and I appreciated this wasn't easy for them, so I was very frugal to myself also. The kind of accommodation is not really meant for students. It was mostly for veterans and former soldiers and the forces, people from the forces. Remember, Portsmouth is a naval base. There's lots of navy after the war, and they're veterans, and they got nowhere to go when they're retiring. So the whole place was full of old soldiers, and one or two students like myself. I had a room to myself, very, very cold, I remember, and very strict also, and I could not have any additional cooking or facilities to supplement the food supply to me. But that was a very good training.
Very good training. So did you have any association with the other guests of the YMCA, or because you are very young, you're only
I was
teenager.
very young. No, I didn't have to be talking to people. You need really the minimum of language skill, which I did not have, but very quickly, after the first year, that is, in the second year, my being there somehow attracted other Chinese students who wanted to join me, so the second year we were a bigger crowd of maybe 7 or 8 people, but early on it was just myself, and it was lonely, but also able to I was able to concentrate my energy to studying.
So you're very brave, because if you today's student, if they're teenager, I think their parents will be very worried if they stay in such a YMCA with different people from different backgrounds.
Yeah. Well, Dad did not know that.
Okay.
I'm quite used to being on my own.
So then you got offered to get into Imperial College. Do you stay in a student hostel, because
Again,
there's no
it wasn't
campus?
a student hostel. It's accommodation near the college, and with many lodges. Probably 2/3 of them are probably students of different kind, and some of them are office workers. It's a very old house. The Imperial College is in Exhibition Road and Physics in Prince Consort Road. Is a concentration of many colleges, not only Imperial College, which consists of science, mining and engineering. Nowadays it's even bigger, but in my time that was all. And there was also Royal College of Music planted in the middle of it, and Royal College of Art, and Science Museum, and other museum, Victoria and Albert Museum, and so on. It's a very cultural area, if I may call it like that, and it's a good place to be. On the other hand, I hardly knew London, because I was within walking distance from the college.
So did you explore other universities, see exhibitions and concerts?
Oh no, concert was the only activities I do outside college, outside studying, and I did not take the opportunity to get to know a bit more about plays or opera. Again, not being able to understand what is going on was a big problem, and it has reduced one's enjoyment. You could put it the other way around by saying that should have been a good motivation to learn more English, but there was no time for that.
So you mentioned that you choose theoretical physics. Is only 10% physics students are allowed to enter this course. Is that difficult for you?
No, it was. It wasn't difficult for me. The reason I say I think it's fair to say that I continued to experience difficulty for not being able to handle my English, and I couldn't write reports for experiments, and my performance in the first and the second year were nothing to sing about. It was very, in fact, I would now call it very poor, but I must have done very well in my mathematics paper, as I always did in those days, because they don't require they don't make a great demand on language. You just solve your mathematics, and to do theoretical physics, the big requirement is that your math mark must be high. Although my average mark was low, my math mark was high, and I squeezed myself into the top 10% to do theoretical physics.
So when you were in Imperial College, who have particularly impact on your life and future career as a researcher?
The one I really eternally grateful for was Brian Cole, who taught me solid state physics, because it was he who rallied around after I graduated from Imperial, that he wanted to make sure that I did get a good research place, and it was he who, I believe, although I never knew it properly, but I guess he must have done written on my behalf to various universities like Manchester and Cambridge, to help me find a place I want to for PhD. This was Brian Coles, and he taught solid state physics, and other college professors called Moses Blackman, who was a student of I've forgotten the name, but he was a famous student of a very famous German physicist, and other people like Stanley Rames and Abdul Salam taught my quantum mechanics and so on. They were brilliant lecturers, and they helped to lay my foundation, which was really very helpful in my research later. Yeah.
So why did you decide to continue to do PhD?
Well, I did not decide, and if you in a very positive way, that's really run right through my experience. Always last-minute decision, and always unexpected. Partly, going back a little bit, is that my undergraduate career was a little unusual. That in the first 2 years there was no questions of me doing PhD. My results were not good enough. But I became a lot better in the final year, simply because I chose the right options. And before graduating, nobody knew what results I will get in the final. So I had a job lined up, working supposed to be in Liverpool, a kind of a industrial research place, but mostly I think it was quality control than anything. And I didn't feel it was time to go back to Singapore. My parents were by then in Singapore. If I was to go back to the East, I would go to Singapore, not Indonesia. Indonesia was just too turbulent politically. I didn't feel it was the right time to go, and my parents were still young enough. So with their agreement, I was going to work here for a few years. And completely out of the blue, I got good enough results. And as I already said, this Brian Coles, who was my lecturer at Imperial College, wrote around at the very last minute, and various friends and his friends and contact in various at university, including Cambridge, to try and find me a place to do PhD. So I very nearly went to Manchester to do a different kind of research, but that was very short-lived, almost aborted very soon. I one day received an invitation letter from Dr. Bowden, who happened to be another fellow of Keys, but he was director of physics and chemistry of solids, which is a small group within the Cavendish. Actually, in terms of number, it wasn't a small group, but it's a group within the Cavendish. To visit them, so I wouldn't want to miss this opportunity to visit the world's most famous laboratory, and I came, and they clearly made up their mind. They wanted me from very early on, and to be a student here, and by hook or crook, they got me in the end. It was a bit of another story, but they got me here to become PhD students, and despite my very mild protest of telling Dr. Bowden initially I did not want to be a student here, because I said thank you very much for inviting me. I have already signed up in Manchester, but he somehow twisted my arms and even to arranging the college place. So in some sense what I did would not happen today, because I never applied, never fill any form, and just became research student the day I came to visit them. And Bowden told me to walk down King's Parade and walk into Keys, the which room, and it turns I don't know who it was, but the first person I met already waiting for me, it was a senior tutor. So I was in that way to Keys, and this senior tutor, actually Freddie Stopp, asked me, do I know Dr. Needham and so on. At that moment when he asked me, I actually forgotten that I have met Needham. Perhaps I didn't quite hear the question correctly, so I said, who? I was simply showing ignorance of who Needham was, and so he was quite surprised that as a Chinese I never heard of Needham, but although I have met him before, very briefly.
So, how long have you studied in Manchester?
No, I didn't study in Manchester
You
at
just-
all.
you
I
just
registered
register.
for probably lasted a month. We're still in the summer before I start. If I started in Manchester, I definitely would not move. But before the term start, maybe it's still in June or July, it must be July time, early July, this change took place, and I think I was in name in Manchester for less than a month, probably 2 weeks.
So your supervisor in Manchester would be very disappointed because he lost a very
Well,
intelligent student.
Well, I don't know about intelligence, but he happened to be a product of Cambridge, of the Cavendish, of a different group, the low temperature physics group of, in fact, at that time, Dr. Schoenberg, who was another fellow of Keys, was in charge, and Bram Pippard in that group, and of course Brian Josephson was also in that group at that time. Immediately on hearing, when I told him that I was invited to visit the Cavendish, he already resigned to the fact that I will not go back to him. What he said to me is, I know those people, you're not coming back. He already knew it. But I know his name is Harry Hall, and he had written some important undergraduate textbooks which I use. But I had a hard time explaining to him afterwards, apologizing my action.
How did this Cambridge people know you? Because they sent an invitation letter to you. Did you contact them?
Yeah, no, I did not contact them. I wouldn't dare contact them, but it was my lecturer, my lecturer at Imperial College, who wrote to them on my behalf without me knowing. I did not know that he wrote to this. How many people, I have no idea, but I'm sure he wrote to them, otherwise they would not have heard of me. But when I was invited, it was an invitation I simply could not refuse, and the opportunity to visit the first class physics laboratory, world famous, was not to be passed, and so on. But there is a lot of element of coincidences and luck, I think, in everything that happened to a person. Maybe in Dr. Bowden's lab, Philip Bowden's lab, there were extra funding, probably looking for a student, and I happened to pop up, so I pop up and pop in.
So you got a full scholarship for PhD at the time? Or?
I have a scholarship. I was paid by the lab, but again it wasn't straightforward because I wasn't British. After 5 years, I was still I think holding Singaporean passport, and not being British, I wasn't qualified to get state studentship. But Bowden, who was a very skilled operator, in the nicest possible way, got money to support me, just like he would support any other British students.
So it only depends on the academic achievement, not on the national. No. So it's very important.
Yes.
Do you remember the first time that you formally become Cambridge student? It is because it's very different. We were in the gown and have a formal dinner,
Yes.
and everything should be different from the other universities.
The first few days was forever remain in my memory, in my mind, and I don't think I was walking on the ground, so to speak, sort of walking in the air for first few days, and the idea that I became a student in Cambridge was just beyond imagination, and coming from the kind of school I was in Indonesia, not only a very backward place in the world scene, but also the political background and everything else, and my own family background, and where my grandparents and my father came from. It was totally unthinkable. I wasn't the first I wasn't the first undergraduate, or rather university graduates in a family, and not even the first PhD, because my sister, who is 8 years senior to me, was a student of Peking University, and she actually, unusually in those days, carried on to do a PhD in Peking University. It wasn't called PhD, it was called 副教授, 副博士, I'm sorry. I don't think that the terminology exists anymore, but why is it called 副博士? I'm not quite sure, but it was 3 years.
It's quite Russian. In Russia, they have
yeah.
Russian.
And in fact, it was part of the Chinese Academy of Science, but positioned in Peking University. So she was there. So she was ahead of me.
So where did you live in at the time?
In Cambridge.
Yes, in Keith's accommodation.
I was always in Keith's accommodation.
It is the May Court or somewhere else?
I was in Harvey Court in West Road. That was the Harvey Court was new. I must have been the first occupant of Harvey Court. And Harvey Court, one of the characteristics of Harvey Court building or architecture is that there's a common balcony for one floor of people, and the first people I met happened to be someone to do theology, and he was, I think, originally a lawyer of King's College, but he wanted to do theology, in a PhD theology in Cambridge, and it's that sort of thing was very new, and to me, that how a person with a background in law or training in law and now want to do theology, but it also reflects the multiple, multiple facets of people, and people were far more versatile, in fact very able. Everyone I met seemed to be so clever and unbelievably so. And I was personally very pleased and of the opportunity to do a PhD, and I was completely open to the new environment, and not just the academic environment to study, but in the various traditions. You mentioned wearing gowns, and in those days students had to wear gown after dark, after 9 o'clock, outside. Otherwise you get fined by university proctor, who acted like a policeman for university. And all sorts of other things. These are, of course, on the one hand, maybe seen as superficial. It's not important. In fact, the only way to treat this sort of thing is unimportant. But it is a tradition to be observed, and there is a reason for that, and that reason may, with time, become no longer a good reason, but for the time being it was, as long as the reason for that tradition to exist, it should be respected. And Cambridge was a completely different world to me, and I had I can't believe how lucky I was to be given so much freedom in my research, to choose the kind of topic I like, and the opportunity to apply myself, ideas and so on. My supervisor, Abe Yoffe, who became very good friends and mentor, was in fact a friend for life. But we got on very well with each other, and it was once again the element of it is important, I should say, that one almost had to create your own environment which is comfortable and I was going to say almost beneficial to your for your life or your study, whatever you're doing at the time, and meeting friends and using the opportunity, and also taking in an uncalculating way, taking advantage of the best of your friends and the friendship, and move on, and that's probably a very important lesson. So as I already said, the lab was a fantastic place to study and to carry out research, and I had a supervisor, this Abe Yoffe, who was completely selfless, and he is such a good teacher and inspiring one. He gave me everything and taught me everything I needed to learn, to know. He was a chemist, and I was trained as a theoretical physicist, so we complement each other rather well in our skill, and I learned a great deal of chemistry from him, and at the same time I was able to apply my theoretical physics skill, my mathematics skill to my research, and that was again a very happy outcome, and that I got a very happy combination.
As we know, with college is kind of the student from different background with different subjects can gather together and you can communicate with. You can have more knowledge about other subjects.
Yeah.
How did you benefit from the community
enormously.
in college?
Again, it's an eye-opening experience for me. At the Imperial College, every building, every subject has its own building. So for 3 years I only went in and out of physics building. I had no contact with people in other departments. That was very silly and very stupid in many ways. But in the college, that's a very happy place for me, because we were research students were not very many, about 30 of us, and thrown in the room, people coming from different subjects and background, countries of origin, with lawyers, historians, and physicists, of course, and everything. And they are not only friendly, they are really highly intelligent. And in the beginning, it seems natural, as well as something pressurizing me to make friends and make conversation with people. I started really speaking English it's on the way to be speaking English properly. How proper, of course, that's for time to tell. And not only speaking English and getting to know how the different system works within the institution was another kind of opening avenue to observe what is going on in this country, how the university work, the college, or even government work, how the democratic system work in England. And there was a first encounter for me to actually become interested and not involved, but just interested in politics, because the politics in the old days to me in school in Indonesia was whatever somebody tells you to believe in. It was propaganda. It wasn't there was no discussion. There was, using the word brainwashing would not be inappropriate. There was school politics, and you were supposed to produce the set propaganda like a parrot, and I was rather against that kind of thing. But coming to Cambridge, I was at least exposed to understanding that people can speak out, people can talk openly, and of course the most famous thing in the 50s, nowadays nobody seemed to bother about it, was Hyde Park Corner. And you can stand at the Hyde Park Corner on a box, as long as you do not use loudspeaker. There's no artificial aid. As long as you just use your human voice to speak, you can say whatever you like. And that happened to be near Marble Arch, I believe, although I never attended it, but it was a symbol, a very important symbol, that democracy or democratic system is alive.
Mm. And you mentioned that the student at the time have more interest in politics than the student nowadays.
Yes, I don't know, maybe pressure of life and pressure of finding a job and so on. And today, students students have a different interest. It's not good or bad. They worry about many more things. Of course, the advent of mass media like television, radio, and international newspaper bring you into contact in terms of knowledge with everything that happens around the world, and that was the way. The way we are now, but in 1960s, 50s, the world was considerably narrower. My contact with America, what American were, was through the people I happened to meet in the room, not through media. That's a big difference. So it forced people into having conversation, building relationship. It's a bridge. And that's actually, it's a big change, social change. now you want to learn something, you probably go into the internet rather than talk to people.
Yeah, and you mentioned that after dinner you meet people in MCR, and then you go back to the library to work. You must work.
In my case, was to the lab. Yes, other people go back to the library. As I indicated, the college life in the college was completely complementary to life in the department. The department was a place to do research. It's a hothouse for idea and putting that idea in reality, making measurements and so on. And so coming to the college in the evening to have dinner was a relief, and it's a very beneficiary relief from the kind of work one does during the day, and when the conversation over dinner table with fellow students from other subjects, and we finish dinner usually about 8:30 or 8:15 in hall, and then we retire very briefly to MCR, have a coffee for an hour or so, less than an hour, until about 9 o'clock usually. And in the meantime, with a cup of coffee in your hand, you talk about anything in the world. One of our fellow students had a cousin who was Grace Kelly, Princess Kelly of Monaco, for example. And very colorful people we have. And about 9 o'clock or so, we disperse. The student in humanities subject will go back to their libraries, but I just went back to the lab and continued my late night session.
To 12 o'clock or even later?
To take measurements.
I mean to 12 o'clock or even 1 o'clock
later,
in the morning?
Even later. You have to appreciate there was no computer, so if you want to measure something, and it's all done, not just everything is done by hand. If you want to change the temperature, you have to twiddle the knob to add a bit of heat to raise the temperature, or and the opposite, to lower the temperature, and you then wait for it to stabilize, because once you change, things take a little time to reach equilibrium, and then you record the measurements by hand, and then you change again, and you wait, change, wait, record, change, wait, record. This will go on whatever length of time it took. We'll do it, because that's how you get research done.
So how many hours normally you sleep a day? Less than 8?
It must vary a lot, yes, less than 8. And it was commented by others later on to say that I was the inventor of flexi time. Again, a term you probably don't come across these days. It was a work. The British worker, especially the trade union, demanded there should be flexi time system. In other words, you clock in, clock out according to your own convenience, but as long as you fill in the right amount of hours in your work. But I was always like that, and probably very late starting and very late finishing, and have to, of course, climb over the wall back into my room.
So did everyone work very hard at the time, or only few of them?
I can't say it's everyone, probably not, and I had to. I'm not sure why I had to work hard, and I always felt I had to put more effort in whatever I do. I'm not really very good at doing anything, so what people take an hour to do, I will take 3 hours. I think that must be the reason, and besides, in research you try to do things that or reach out to an area that other people are not doing. Otherwise, it's not worth doing research. It was important. Research means something new, if possible, creative, but not always possible. was something new, and what is new is depending on different circumstances, different things. And in Britain, we never had the best equipment to do research compared with America. So we really had to invent things to do, and take advantage we could. And in physics, there are many things. You can have the best equipment, so you could make measurements that other people have not been able to do. When I say best equipment, meaning an equipment which is not, when you take the measurement, which hasn't got a lot of noise within the measurements. But you could also try and excel in preparing the best sample for your measurements, the purer sample or the cleaner sample. And in my case was a thinner sample, for example, and to handle single crystals of a thickness which was like 1/10 of the wavelength of light was something quite unique, and it took a lot of hard work, but it was unique, and that's how we could compare ourselves in the international scene. And when I say 1/10 of the wavelength of light, if you imagine in 1 centimeter, you can have 20,000 wavelength of green light. So if you think of green light, packaging it in terms of unit of wavelength, you can have 20,000 of them in 1 centimeter, and I'm talking about a factor of 10 beyond that. It's that sort of thickness of single crystal to be handled under microscope with tweezers. There was no mechanical aid to help you handle very delicate, very small stuff. It was entirely steady hands and steady environment, and we managed to stay in the international competitions that way.
So, did you publish any articles when you were doing PhD? Did you have any pressure to?
It wasn't an artificial pressure from outside, but like everything else, it's a matter of competition. There are, if you say, like, if there are 10 PhD students, maybe only 1 or 2 of them will end up continuing in the even more competitive world of academia, and the rest either change their field or go into industrial research, where one was required to do something much more specific and routine, and it's a different character from being in academia, and of course this means competition, and it would not be unusual that during the PhD time one would have published 3 papers. If you can publish 5 papers, then you're doing reasonably well. That's the same as it's just all competition. It's the same as getting into university, how many A levels and how high your A level grade is.
So how many years normally a PhD student in Cavendish got PhD? 3 years or 5 years at a time?
Oh, it depends on the subject. The theoretical people could finish in 3 years, and the experimental people normally 4 years, or even a bit more than 4 years. But the fact that the funding was limited to 3 years put a lot of pressure to everyone to finishing in 3 years, unless it's a special circumstance, such as the equipment you built wasn't working, so you wasted a year, or you are unwell for a period, then there would be lengthened. And if the department, or rather the group, has its own money, such as the group of Dr. Bowden was wealthy enough to be able to support people in this sort of circumstances, and they did that to me too. I happened to be unwell for quite a while.
When did you get the PhD degree?
I got my PhD formally in 1968.
1968.
Yes.
So
I'm not sure whether it's late 67 or 68. Yeah.
okay, and do you know where whether your classmates changed their subject to others?
Oh, they went all over the place. I think majority of them did go to industry. There were still some very significant industry around in Britain which recruit PhDs, ICI, and the gas board, the electricity board, those are government agency, and pharmaceutical one, but there are few of them. So at least half of them will go into that area, BP, then those days still called British Petroleum, and some would go to America for postdoc position of 2 years or 3 years. Britain actually, rather British universities' position was completely frozen. So I can't remember precisely how long. There was just no job, no opening for, it must be 4 or 5 years, and I happened to be in the middle of the 4 or 5 years, and getting a research fellowship in a college in Keys was got sent to me too. Without that, I would not have been able to stay in Cambridge. So the research fellowship in Keys first, that was the only support I had enough, and 2 years later the university position opened, and I had my university post.
Why the post was frozen at the time? Is
Economy
is not good. So where?
It's just like today.
Yeah, like
worse
today.
than today.
Okay, it's worse than today.
In terms of job, it was really worse than today.
And where the funding came from?
It's mainly government, and the government had two sides. One is the Research Council. I think at the beginning it's called DSIR, Department of Science and Industrial Research, and then the other side is UGC, University Grant Council, and the UGC was responsible for paying university academics' salary, as well as the maintaining buildings, and the Research Council was maintaining more the research equipment facilities in the department, like physics, as well as the students. So those two parts are fairly clear divisions, and colleges, college like Keys, did have sufficient endowment to spend its money on what they saw as appropriate, including supporting research fellows, very important aspect of it. But curiously enough, the idea of university having big endowment, money to spend, building this or making special appointment, or department having similar thing, was simply alien. We did not think of things like that. The turnover for physics department, I think, could not have been more than £200,000. But now we're talking about £8 million turnover a year. It's just unthinkable.
So the economy was bad at the time. So, but you get some limited funding.
Yes.
So I just wonder whether the Cavendish Laboratory had any funding from industry in your time.
By and large, industrial funding was a small percentage of the total, and the main part was made up by Research Council funding, as far as the department is concerned. Of course, the university received university grant University Grant Council funding to pay for salaries. But it doesn't mean that we have it's what we call external funding from industry. The Royal Society would give money as well. But for rather pure kinds of research, and the group I was in of Dr. Bowden was heavily applied, and he, although I had nothing to do with it, he and his smaller group was interested in friction, for example, and their friction very important in all kinds of things like machinery, frictions in reducing friction in machinery. What the best part of support he got was from an industry in Norway to develop skis that has as little friction as possible, and that was industrial research, and in fact that was typical of Bowden, who was able to pick up opportunity like that. Never did we imagine that what we were doing has anything to do with ski, but he made it so. If in industry research, industry support rather, expect much more short-term and immediate results, immediate benefit to them, whereas theoretical research is just something much more long-term, and this is reflected then in the funding source. The industry more interested in helping or supporting applied research, and the theoretical research had to depend on research council.
Because we know the Cavendish Laboratory is very famous in the world, and you have many very distinguished scholars, even the scholar who have a Nobel Prize. So that is because that is the theoretical research, right?
No. It was again the very important character or characteristics of the Cavendish is that it is experimentally based, and that suits me very well, because I like experiment. I like making observations and base any theory on what you observe rather than the other way around. And this basic concept is so very important. The Cavendish is an experimental laboratory. If I simply say that the head of the Cavendish professor, the old title, the original title until 1972, that's exactly 100 years. The title of the Cavendish professor, full title, is Cavendish Professor of Experimental Physics. Ironically, it was never held by anyone who actually trained in experimental physics. It was always held by theoreticians. That's quite interesting. Rutherford may be an exception. He came, actually, he was good with experiments.
So, do you know, would you like to introduce what are the reasons that make the Cavendish Laboratory very successful? The experiment is the one point. How about the others?
Oh, I think this is a difficult question to answer, because it's not one single factor. The time, the people, very important. The leadership, the intellectual leadership is also play a big part. People like J.J. Thomson and Rutherford and Bragg, they then are very free-thinking people, as well as not only themselves, but they allow the freedom in the PhD students to do things they want, and you easily see people starting with one topic and ending up a totally different topic, different area, but equally welcome. The important thing is quality. If good stuff is a good stuff, doesn't matter whether what you call it, different things, and it's that sort of attitude, the freedom is important. And the other thing is, of course, we were good at making things, and invention or creation is not just creating idea, but creating the physical object. And the Rutherford years in the 30s, if you visit the Cavendish laboratory, you will see in our so-called museum all kinds of old equipment. These were built in the hand of the people who later got Nobel Prizes. And how many PhD students these days have the opportunity to build their equipment? Very, very little, very few, partly because, again, unless you build an equipment specifically to measure certain thing which nobody else had thought of, therefore you'll be the first to publish it. The competition is such that nowadays you depend on having very good equipment, but that means students losing the opportunity to learn how to create this thing for his own research, and that I think is a very important factor.
This is the intellectual and leadership.
Intellectual leadership and the freedom,
and the freedom.
given freedom and an opportunity to the researchers. I should also say about people in those days, I have the feeling we're not confined or constrained by a lot of formality and administrations, rules and regulations. People come to do research can do it for a year with probably his own funding. The department wouldn't have much money to support you, and after a year he would then go away, or she would then, mostly he, go away and for a few more years, 3 or 4 years, perhaps make a little bit more money and come back again to do that without formally registering or doing anything. And probably many of them never had PhD or any post. They just come in and out. It was very, very relaxed and very free. It just seemed to be the right kind of environment for ideas to blossom.
But now it's quite different.
Everything is now so restricted, so regulated. People were so afraid that unless you do something exactly according to the book, then you will be criticized. Well, it's gradually changed. The war made a big difference, and it's a lot of it to do with number of people, and the place suddenly became very crowded, and when there were only few people, you can get away with everybody knows everybody, and everybody knows the quality of other people, and you don't really have to look at the paper. And then later on, this really is not workable because there's too many people. You have to make a lot of selections. You have to do all kinds of things. No, the whole social structure changed. I would say the biggest change probably came in about 100 years after Cavendish first founded. It's about 1972, 1970s, when we physically moved from central town to the west side.
Then you become a fellow of the college. I think it should be a great improvement of the status. And
it was, because as I already said, the job situation in Cambridge, in the university, was frozen. So there was no questions of university posts. And I also, come to think of it, always had my sight or my ambition not very high. I wouldn't dream of becoming a university lecturer. So in the first place, I never dreamt of doing a PhD in Cambridge, but I got through it. And after that, I was planning to go to America because there was a visiting professor in the Cavendish who invited me to join him in Chicago. I did not go because of research fellowship in Keys, but it was a very lucky part on mine, because the Chicago place very soon became not very good at all. So I was lucky not gone there. Yes, getting a research fellowship was a kind of security I needed, quite important one as well. But at the same time, of course, very soon after that, in fact, university post came 2 years later. I had to start teaching, lecturing, which was quite challenging for me. Even then, having written a thesis, I was still speaking broken English, so, and it was hard work. But fortunately, I always loved teaching. I still do today, and the challenge, I was quite happy to meet the challenge. And I don't know what the student thought of me, but at least I deliver. So that was in the department, and I was given even more freedom, and started taking students, choosing the subject I want them to do with me, collaborating. Again, now IBFA, my former supervisor, became a colleague, a very close colleague and collaborator. And I use the word selfless. That is exactly what he is, he was. He always, from my point of view, I seem to be always being propped up by him. He always tried to promote me in every way possible, which is quite unthinkable in many ways. For example, he got invitations to go international conferences, to give some invited paper, plenary paper, but he would then pass that on to me and say, I go. In fact, he wasn't that much older than I. He was certainly in his prime, but he hadn't achieved the local recognitions as much as he achieved recognition internationally. In other words, Cambridge University never made him professor, but we knew how good he was. But he always tried to, part of that maybe to do with the fact that he always promote other people, promote his students like me. So I became more known internationally from a very early age, or early career of research. And that helped me, but probably didn't help him very much. But he is or was a person like that, and everybody knew that. And that's on the research side. And I also had a lot to do, a little later, of course, with collaboration in Europe with different institutions and university in the continental Europe through EEC, and of course meeting in Brussels and so on. That gave me a very valuable lessons or experience when I became director of International Interdisciplinary Research Center in Superconductivity in the 90s.